الله أكبر الله أكبر.
I was born in India, in a village, on the 1st of July, 1918. In August 1927, I reached Durban, South Africa.
This is the Madrasa Arcade in Durban, South Africa.
The curious narrow alleyways of the Madrasa Arcade are familiar to Yaqub Mehtar. Over 50 years ago, he and his young friend Ahmed would wander through the marketplace on their way to the tailor shop of Ahmed's father, Hussein Deidat.
And this is the shop of Mr. Deidat Senior.
9-year-old Ahmed Deidat moved to Durban in 1927 to join his father Hussein, who had settled there a few years earlier. Ahmed's voyage to South Africa had been long and difficult. In fact, he almost never made it to the streets of Durban. Much of the money went to pay for the rent of their small apartment in Ismail Building, next to one of the oldest mosques in Durban. One of Ahmed's neighbors in the building, Ahmed Suleiman Beylim, would eventually become one of his lifelong supporters.
This is the building, and on the right you see this apartment here. Ahmed Deidat and his family stayed, and I used to be his neighbor. Next one, which is in apartment number 2.
So you are very close.
So we're very close. In fact, nice people, but their family was very poor people.
Ahmed enrolled at the Anjuman school, where he was in Standard 4. It was the first time he had seen the letters ABC and heard the words yes and no. In 6 months' time, however, he had learned English and became the top of his class. He was promoted to the next standard, where he also excelled academically. Every day he walked to school and back home because his father couldn't afford the bus fare of 2 pennies. He later moved on to Sastry College, a respectable school built by an Indian immigrant to South Africa. Ahmed showed up for the first day of his new school in his clean new uniform, ready to hit the books. But this is where Ahmed Deidat's education came to an abrupt end. He must have spent only a few hours walking these corridors because after only 3 days at college, his father pulled him out. Financial considerations put an abrupt end to him furthering his education. His mission was outside Durban in the rolling hills of rural South Africa. Ahmed took a job in a country store called the O.N. Mohammed shop. Just across the way was the enormous Adams Mission Complex, an institute where young missionaries learned how to convert others to Christianity.
These missionaries, they were making life miserable for us from this college. They were getting training there as to how to deal with the Muslims. And as they came to do their shopping here, they asked us questions. Criticism, actually. It says, Muhammad has so many wives. I knew nothing about that. It says, Muhammad spread his religion at the point of the sword. I knew nothing about that. He says, he copied his book from the Jews and the Christians. I knew nothing about that. So what was I as a Muslim to do? I had a natural urge for reading. And one Sunday morning, going into my boss's warehouse, go down, I was rummaging through a pile of old newspapers, looking for some better reading material than newspapers to read. And as I was looking for such a material, I came across a worm-eaten book. This book, we have renewed the cover, but a worm-eaten book. And when I picked it up, I started to sneeze because it was all full of mildew. And I read the title of the book. It said, Izharul Haq, spelled out in Latin script, IZHARULHAKK, Izharul Haq. Now to me that sounded Arabic, Izharul Haq. It sounds like Arabic. So I didn't know what it meant. I see here at the bottom it says the truth revealed. This was a very old publication, printed in 1915 in India. 2 years older than myself. I was born in 18, this is 3 years older than myself. Now this book actually changed my life.
Ahmad Deedat now had his armor. His shield would be his extensive knowledge of the Bible and Quran, and his sword would be his frank, piercing style of delivery. In 1940, he took to the stage and began giving lectures to small audiences, the first of which was Muhammad, the Messenger of Peace.
I made appointments with them to go to their homes on Sundays, after church, their church, and talking to them, and I talked myself into talking until I came to Durban, reside in Durban. I found a job in Durban. And in Durban, around the 50s, an opening took place. This is also Allah's Musabbib al-Asbab. We had a very charismatic speaker coming from overseas. And this speaker, very unusual, for a Sunday morning, he used to get 300 people every Sunday morning. And the crowd was increasing continuously. And I used to attend this talk of his, very fascinating. At the end of the talk, question and answers, and when everything was over, after a few months, a revert to Islam, an Englishman who had become Muslim, by the name of Mr. Fairfax. This Mr. Fairfax, he suggested this, look, any of you, if you are interested, I am prepared to teach you people comparative religion. But he called it Bible class. He said, I will teach you the Bible, how to use the Bible in propagating Islam. So he said, very good. So out of this 200 to 300 audience every Sunday morning that this other gentleman drew, about 15 to 20 opted to remain for a second injection. And this Mr. Fairfax began teaching us that, look, in the book of Daniel, there are certain prophecies and how to use those prophecies. In the book of Deuteronomy, in the Bible, there are certain prophecies regarding the coming of our Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and how we can exploit them, how we can expound them. So this thing carried on for a few weeks or a couple of months, and then Mr. Fairfax was absent. And I could see the disappointment on the faces of these young people. We were all young then, 15 to 20 of us. We're looking at each other's faces, disappointed, and we break up. The following Sunday again, we look at each other's faces. Where is Mr. Fairfax? No news. And we break up. The third Sunday, I suggested to them, to those people who were enthusiastic about having a second inning, I said, look, if you like, I can carry on where Mr. Fairfax left off, because I had the knowledge that I was sitting in to give this person my moral support. Myself and my secretary, who has just passed away, Mr. G.H. Vanker. Now, we were both knowledgeable as far as the Bible was concerned, but we would give them our moral support, so we would sit there and with the rest. Now I said, look, if you like, I will carry on from where Mr. Fairfax left off, and if you get bored, tired, fed up, just yawn, and there will be notice enough for me to stop. And for 3 years, I continued talking to them, and I discovered now that that was my best way of learning, because there is no better way to learn than to teach. As our Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he said, "Ballighu anni walau ayah." Deliver the message regarding me, even if it is one verse. That's a secret. If you have one verse, and if you share, and you share, and you share, then Allah fills you up with more. I didn't know that then, but I can now realize what was happening. Teaching them. Then I had some visitors to come along. There were some visitors coming from Johannesburg, and they stayed in for my class. And they felt that they can exploit my talents. So they said, look, we are having a birthday celebration of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the City Hall of Johannesburg, and we would like you to come and speak to us. So I said, I'm a working class man, I can't afford these trips, but if you give me an air ticket, I will come. So they gave me an return air ticket, and for the first time in my life, I traveled by air to reach Johannesburg and deliver the lecture. Now that gave me an idea. But if I can lecture in the City Hall of Johannesburg, what is wrong with the City Hall of Durban? So we organized a lecture here in the City Hall of Durban. And it was in 1958, December 1958. As a result of that, two Caucasians, white people, Europeans, they started visiting our offices in Madrasa Arcade. And subsequently, twice, a certain type of conversion took place that we converted to those two white gentlemen who were coming to my office. We converted them in the West Street Mosque here in Durban, and then another two within a week, an Indian and a European again in the Juma Masjid, Durban. So there was somebody watching. Allah watches all times, but there was somebody else who was witnessing our work. An elderly gentleman by the name of Haji S.I. Kadwa. So after the second conversion of people in the Juma Masjid, the man, while he's tying his shoelaces, I'm also on the same bench tying my shoelaces, he's telling me that he had observed my work, what I had been doing, and he likes it very much. And he said, look, I've got 75 acres of land at a place called Brahma in Natal, about 55 miles outside Durban, and I'm prepared to give it to you. So I said, I accept. He said, no, not so fast. You must first have a look at the place. I said, what is there to look? So he said, no, you must first have a look. I was thinking that if there are 50 acres of rocks, I will still have 25 acres of good land. If there are 25 acres of rocks, I'll have 50 acres of good land. And Natal is a garden colony. This colony is called a garden colony with all its greenery and beauty and natural qualities about it. So he said, no, you must have a look. So I, with our trustees, I went down and I saw the land, and I accepted it, and I started establishing an institution called As-Salam, where I could train Muslim missionaries. It is functioning at the moment.
Ahmed and his family uprooted from Durban and moved 80 kilometers south to the uninhabited hills surrounding As-Salam. He had to chop down trees just to reach the land. Once he arrived, he immediately put his hand to the plow in establishing the institution. But Ahmed was devoted to spreading Islam in the best way he knew how, by speaking. His wife, Hawa, was at first shocked to see her husband doing so well up on the stage.
I thought, can this man talk?
But his talks gained in popularity until eventually he found himself here at the town hall in Durban. He now had a full house of around 2,000 people. Deedat's lectures here were some of the few events in which segregation briefly disappeared. His message was that there were many contradictions in the Christian Bible and doctrine, and that Muhammad was indeed a noble messenger sent by God. Ahmed's preaching began to take over his life. He moved to apartment number 45 Hussein building, where he put in countless hours of planning as well as budgeting.
We had been doing a certain type of work in that we were using the Juma Masjid Durban for attracting visitors. So we started advertising the Juma Masjid Durban. In the Durban Corporation brochure, they give out to visitors, tourists, we saying that visit the largest mosque in the southern hemisphere. For a free guided tour, phone 27054. That was a very old number. And people used to phone and they used to come. Because generally to the tourist, they didn't know the difference between a mosque and a temple. To them now, these are synonymous terms. So they came and we explained to them what goes on. We gave them free literature, and this was one of our major works that we were doing, giving out literature and explaining Islam.
If I were to tell you, you said, look, what is the name of the God that you worship? And if I said Muhammad, for example, if I said Muhammad, immediately you think of a camel driver born in Mecca, some 600 years after Jesus, right? And if you know his history, so yes, his father's name was Abdullah, his mother's name was Amina, and he was born in Makkah, he died in Medina, he's buried there, so you have a mental picture. So as soon as you have a mental picture, it's rejected in Islam. You can't have any name which creates a mental picture. We Muslims, we say that call God Almighty by any name. Call him by any name, as long as that name is not contaminated.
And holding lecture meetings throughout the country on different topics where we can enthuse the Muslim with regards to propagation. So strengthen them against the Christian missionary activity and put them in a position that they can talk back and explain Islam.
Meanwhile, his popularity was growing nationwide. He was invited to Cape Town, where he received an overwhelming response. In Cape Town, he lectured in huge lecture halls, including the Good Hope Center and City Hall. To them, Ahmad Deedat was a knight in shining armor who had come to liberate them from the pressures of hardline missionaries and the idea that Islam was not a credible religion. Along with his momentum came the demand for a professional organization which could manage the size of planning and the money he needed to continue. And so in 1957, Ahmad Deedat, alongside two of his closest friends, founded the Islamic Propagation Center in Durban. The organization's first base was a tiny one-room office in the Madrasa arcade. The three founders started recruiting staff, one of whom was a secretary by the name of Muhammad Khan.
So he said, join us, Mr. Veronica and Mr. Deedat. They wanted to typist. I'm a typist.
After London, he was swept up in a whirlwind of tours.
We started with advertising the Quran in our local Sunday newspapers, one called the Sunday Tribune. We advertised Quranic verses under the heading, The Quran Speaks, a message from the Quran, and giving our name and address that further inquiries can be made, and for free literature they can write. And then the same thing we started doing for the African people in the Zulu language newspaper called Ilanga Lasi Natal, meaning the son of Natal, in which we had Quran Yakuluma, which means what the Quran says. And again, the same technique, verses from the Quran translated into Zulu and offering people free information and literature. In buildings you'll find the sign saying, read Al-Quran, the Last Testament. Read Al-Quran, the Last Testament. During the day, the sign is there, and at night, it flashes, the color. So in other words, attracting people's attention. We have so far handled this office of mine, some 85,000 Holy Quran translations, Arabic text, translation and commentary, which we have been selling, and what returns we get gets plowed back into propagation. I want to help the people in Sri Lanka and in India, Pakistan, in the UK. We want to do this, that the Quran is made available. We are reproducing videotapes of our lectures, mostly on comparative basis. Like this particular one, it says Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Bible in response to Swagat. Whole world is crying for these tapes because it's something novel to them. It's really a novel thing because they have heard lectures about only addressing Muslims, how to make salat, we must give zakat, we must not drink, we must not gamble, we must be attired Islamically and all that. They have been listening to that continuously for centuries now, for decades. But now comes along something novel most especially people in a Western environment, like in the United States or in any other country where Muslims are, where the Christian missionaries are making onslaughts, like in India and in Pakistan and in Bangladesh and in Indonesia, wherever the Muslims are, we find that they are under attack and they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to respond to these Christian missionaries. So our tapes are doing the job. So there is a demand all over the world, so the department is expanding and increasing. So we have now exploited the machines, these electronic wizards, by creating what we call Islamic telecoms. We have two in Durban at the present moment.
One in our own building here, two of our shops, we took them over, shops in the building, and we changed them into Islamic telecoms. What happens there is that in the window, we have a monitor that at least 16 hours a day, our programs are being played, passers-by are being attracted. Then inside, we have seating accommodation that the people can come and sit inside, watch the monitor inside in comfort. We have now started training da'is, people who can go and propagate Islam. Because the Muslims all over the world, where I go and lecture, they seem to have taken a liking to my approach. Because something that was lacking in that the Muslim didn't know how to approach the non-Muslim, the Jews, the Christians, the Hindus, and I'm showing them how it can be done. To me, it's just a very natural thing to do, which Allah Bari Ta'ala gives us a secret in the Holy Quran when He says, "Qul," tell them, "Ya Ahl al-Kitab, O people of the book, O Jews and Christians, ta'alaw, come. Ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum," that we come to common terms as between us and you. Let us get onto a common platform. Some understanding us about basics. And then Allah Bari Ta'ala tells us what to talk about. But now we have not been doing that because we didn't know how. Allah is telling you on a common platform, talk about this. Allah na'budu illallah wa la nushrika bihi shay'an wa la yattakhidha ba'duna ba'dan arbaba min dunillah.